Today on Inside Utah Politics, Senator-elect John Curtis joins the show for one of his first interviews since his election win. Governor Cox wins outs where he's setting some priorities for his second term. And Donald Trump wins term number 2, how he's preparing his transition back to power.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm Brien McElhatten. Let's go inside Utah politics now. We begin our program with Utah's newest senator-to-be. Republican Representative John Curtis came away from election night with a commanding majority. The Associated Press called his race right as polls were set to close here in Utah. As of this taping, he holds a strong lead over Democrat Caroline Gleick with 63% to Gleick's 32%. Now, we caught up with him as those results came down, and he told us he's excited to continue his work in D.C., now, though, in the upper chamber.
During the campaign, everybody asked me, are you more like Mike Lee or more like Mitt Romney? And I've always been very clear, look, I'm John Curtis, and that's what I bring. And while I admire traits about all of them, I'm clearly John Curtis, and I think that's important for the constituents. And the good news is they have 7 years of knowing who John Curtis is in Congress, and I don't think there's any surprises.
After all the celebrations came to an end, we had another chance to sit down with the senator-elect. He spoke with our Jordan Tracy about his plans for key issues and how a Republican Senate majority will set priorities.
All right, Representative Curtis, welcome to Inside Utah Politics for the last time under that title. How about that?
I'm going to miss it.
Absolutely. So first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
Kind of walk me through the evening. Your race was the first to get called here in Utah, even though numbers weren't really coming in. It was a longer delayed night. Kind of take me through your reaction to the evening and kind of your feelings in Provo.
Well, I'll just tell you what, we did it in Provo, which is kind of home turf for me, and we had a lot of Provo food, Provo entertainment. It was kind of throwback to the mayor days, which were just a really important part of my life. And I'm just going to tell you, it was a very nice night.
I think there was a specialty like sodas and things like that.
Oh, we had that. We had cookies, and we had all these Provo homegrown foods. It was just really nice.
Absolutely. So jumping right into the matters of policy, okay? Yes. So clean energy has always been a priority for you.
Absolutely.
How do you think that agenda changes or transitions from the House to the Senate? Some things that you maybe do differently or continue?
So look, the world is crying for affordable, reliable, clean energy, and I want it to come from Utah, and certainly from the United States. And so it doesn't change. It's going to continue to be a huge priority. And I think it's clear that Utahns elected me to advocate for Utah, to legislate for Utah, and that's what I intend to do.
Your opponent, Caroline Gleick, she is a climate activist. She talks about how she would be in your office routinely and kind of pledges to continue to do that. But when you have an issue like clean energy and maybe some of the things that you guys could maybe overlap on, and she's very active, is there anything that you can kind of come together on issues and work together going forward?
You know, I think what's really important about the way I've approached this is it's in line with Utah's values and from a conservative perspective. And that's been missing. And so I invite her to kind of see that through our eyes. And I think if that part of her constituency we can make a lot more progress than kind of this divisive, we're right, you're wrong attitude that you see sometimes.
Absolutely. So the economy ranked high on exit polls is one of the issues
no doubt, right,
that drove voters out there. And the message was clear, looking at the results, that something needed to change. How will you and the new Republican Senate majority try to make those changes? What are some of the things that you look to prioritize when it comes to the economy?
So this is clear. We need to make Washington more like Utah and America more like what we need for our children and our grandchildren. And there's no better example of that than the way we budget and the fiscal responsibility that we have here in Utah. That needs to be issue number one back in Washington. This debt is just out of control, and that's a big deal to Utahns.
And then you see the result in the presidential, now President-elect Donald Trump. What is your response to the results you saw last night?
I think it's a loud message. I think everybody needs to be paying attention. Americans are grumpy, and rightly so. And they wanted a course correction. I think that's what you saw last night in the election. And
how do you think if the Republicans are able to pick up the House? Right now you picked up the Senate. If you have all three, how do you think you can move forward? What are some of the, is there going to be, sweeping changes? Because, I mean, even inside the party, there's been disagreements,
That's for sure.
We can't look at the 118th Congress and say a lot of agreement happened, a lot of things got done. So now moving into the Senate, how do you, try to reconcile maybe even differences within the own own party to see things change?
Yeah, I think, if you look here in Utah, like we have broad consensus. This is not Republican or Democrat, that we need to do things better in Washington, D.C. We need to do a better job at the border. That's bipartisan. We need to do a better job with the economy. That's bipartisan. We need to do a better job with inflation. And Utah is really longing for people who can actually fix these problems. And I'm confident we can. I have confidence in this country. I really believe we can do these things. But to do that, we've got to get serious. We don't need show horses. We need serious people who are really willing to do serious work.
And I think that's an interesting term you brought up, show horses, okay? Because when you look at the national stage, there are politicians that are out there. They're on all the major networks. There's a lot of divisive rhetoric. You're not someone who does that, but is there a way that, the fact that you're not that kind of representative, that maybe you can make a change, maybe speak up and be a leader for more unity in the party, in the country?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can just tell people, don't look for me by the cameras or the microphones, but look for me in my Ford driving up and down this state, serving particularly rural Utah and all of Utah, making sure they feel represented in Washington, D.C. Rural Utah will tell you the last thing you need in troubled times is a cowboy that's all hat and no cattle, right? They want us to go to work, and that's what I intend to do.
Have you heard from Senator Lee at all?
I did. He was actually in Florida last night, and he and I have communicated, and I just really look forward to working with him. There's a lot that he and I can work on together.
And one of the big decisions in the Senate is going to be who's going to be the leader post McConnell. Have you weighed that at all? I mean, I know you're just fresh. Have you thought about that at all?
Yeah,
any names you want to throw out?
Well, look, John Thune and John Cornyn are clearly the leaders. I think Mr. Scott from Florida is also weighing in on this. They are really good people, and that's one of the first things we're doing next week when we get back. And I could just tell you, I'm not sure who will win, but whomever it is, I think is going to be very, very key and important. And we're fortunate that we're selecting some from really talented people.
And then when you look at the results from election night, you see Democrats not performing well, but one issue was abortion that did perform well in a lot of the states, and now being in the Senate with possibly a majority in the House as well, and of course the presidency now. If there's a bill that comes about when it comes to a national abortion ban or restrictions nationally, is that something that you'd support? Or
listen, President Trump's been clear about this. I've been clear about this. This is a state's issue. When that was decided by the Supreme Court, I chaired that, and I think that's where it belongs, and I think that's where we need to let the decision reside.
And obviously, a lot of the things that's said on issues like that are before you have maybe a 3 majority. So if that changes, I'm going to ask you.
Well, and that's fair, but I'm telling you, what I'm hearing from people is border, inflation, economy, and let the states deal with this. But that's what we have a mandate to go fix these serious problems, and I'd just be really surprised if that was even on President Trump's radar.
And then on the economy, I want to touch on real quick. From a macro level, you look at, and the economy is performing well with unemployment and things like that. But it was really grocery store issues that people were concerned about. The fact that a box of cereal costs more than it did. The fact that gasoline costs more than it did. Do you think that really was the problem, that voters, don't feel the macro level of economics, but it's the micro, it's the kitchen table stuff that they feel?
Not only that, when you tell them there's no problem with the economy, they feel like you're calling them stupid. Like, they know there's a problem. And sure, you can point to some signs, you can prove anything with statistics, but people know there's some really fundamental problems with our economy, primarily inflation. And so it doesn't do any good to tell them, hey, you shouldn't worry about this, because they are worried, and we need to fix it.
And then I don't know this for a fact, but I was told that you wear cool socks. Okay, that's not something that I know personally, but it's something I'm told. I'm still new here. Okay. So, did you wear any special socks on election night, and are you wearing any special socks?
Oh, absolutely. But I will just tell you, some people go to Washington and they're known for their oratory. Some are known for their legislation. I'm going to be known for my socks.
What were the special socks?
So they were, of course, red, white, and blue, and they were a different right sock on the left sock. And I'm sorry you weren't there to enjoy the sock experience. And by the way, we gave away socks to everybody that came last night.
Oh, that's fantastic. Hey, listen, that's pretty. I also like to wear some fancy socks. Right now, I have the Rugrats on my feet. So
we can't take ourselves too serious, right?
That's right. Yeah. All right, Senator-elect Curtis, does that sound good to you?
It sounds very good. Thank you,
sir. Thank you so much for joining us and talking to us inside Utah politics.
Thank you,
folks. We'll be right back.
All right, Utah's 4 seats in the House of Representatives were up for grabs as well. And it looks like Utah will send 4 Republicans to the lower chamber again, starting with Congressional District 1, which represents much of northern Utah. This is Republican Blake Moore's district. He leads Bill Campbell's 64% to 32%, and that's with 82% in at the time of this recording. Down in CD2, Republican Congresswoman Celeste Malloy has a solid lead over Nathaniel Woodward, 60% of the vote to 33% of the vote. This district runs from Salt Lake City down to St. George. It stretches as far east as Canyonlands, a big district. In District 3, we have 2 new faces. Republican State Senator Mike Kennedy leads Democrat Glenn Wright, 65% to 35%. And this is the seat that Congressman John Curtis left to run for Senate and represents from the Wasatch Front down to Blanding. And last but not least, we have Congressional District 4. This represents parts of Salt Lake, Sanpete, Juab, and Utah County. Burgess Owens set to keep the seat for the GOP, leading Democrat Katrina Fallick-Wang 62% to 32% of the vote. Still ahead here on Inside Utah Politics, former President Trump, now President-elect, makes history. How Democrats are reacting to his projected, now official return to the Oval Office. And coming up, the Fed cuts rates and postures for the Trump second term. Why Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, says he plans to stay right where he is. Don't you go anywhere. We'll be right back.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Welcome back, everyone. We're turning our eyes now to the White House. Donald Trump is the presumptive president-elect, after all but sweeping the swing states before the sun rose on Wednesday. And as of the time we are taping here, Trump has projected to win the majority of electoral votes. That includes a win here in the state of Utah. Former President Donald Trump leads Vice President Kamala Harris 59% to 38% of the vote. That's with 71% of the vote in at the time of this recording. Now, the AP projected him to win the state before polls had even closed here on election night. And with the election behind him, Trump is beginning to plan his second administration. Our Washington correspondent, Rashad Hudson, has more from West Palm Beach.
Former President Donald Trump is relishing in what his supporters call the greatest political comeback in American history. After a sweeping victory, Donald Trump will lead the United States once again.
This was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time. There's never been anything like this in this country and maybe beyond.
A handful of people line the street near Trump's home in Palm Beach to show their excitement. Trump says he's ready to hit the ground running. Other than the economy, Trump says his day one priority will be securing the southern border.
We're going to fix our borders. We're going to fix everything about our country.
To help address many of those priorities, Trump will have a Republican-led Senate, something outgoing Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell is celebrating.
Certainly a happy day for the GOP.
Now the focus for Trump turns to who will serve in his administration. Some of the names floating are tech billionaire Elon Musk and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
I hope that you're going to be looking back someday and say that was one of the truly important moments of my life when I voted for this group of people beyond the president.
Vice President Harris called former President Trump to congratulate him on his victory. Trump acknowledged Harris's strength and tenacity throughout the race, and both talked about the importance of uniting the country. Reporting in West Palm Beach, I'm Rashad Hudson.
President Joe Biden is calling for unity after President-elect Donald Trump's big win. Biden says he'll ensure a peaceful and orderly transition of power, saying that's what the American people deserve. He also took it as a chance to tout the work of his own administration over the last 4 years.
Much of the work we've done is already being felt by the American people, but the vast majority of it will not be felt over the next 10 years. We're going to see over $1 trillion worth of infrastructure work done, changing people's lives in rural communities and communities that are in real difficulty.
Vice President Harris has also spoken publicly to concede the race to the former president.
We will engage in a peaceful transfer of power. We owe loyalty not to a president or a party, but to the Constitution of the United States.
Well, the Federal Reserve is cutting interest rates for a second time in 2 months, a sign of lowering inflation now. But mortgage rates, interest rates, and car loans, those are still rising. Our Washington correspondent Vinay Simlot explains why.
The Federal Reserve announced a cut in the benchmark interest rate by 0.25%. Chairman Jerome Powell says it's because of lower prices.
Inflation has eased significantly over the past 2 years.
And he says the Fed is easing interest rates to make sure unemployment remains stable. Unemployment in October was 4.1%, higher than last year's 3.8%.
We don't want the labor market to soften much from here.
Even though the Fed is trying to make it cheaper to borrow money, Freddie Mac says interest rates for mortgages have increased for 6 straight weeks. The average 30-year mortgage is 6.79%. Analysts say it's a sign investors are worried about increasing inflation and more government debt in a second Trump term. But Powell says the Federal Reserve's decision-making is not based on the results of the election.
It's such an early stage, we don't know what the policies are.
President-elect Donald Trump appointed Jerome Powell, but in his first term, Trump publicly attacked Powell and the Fed's decision-making. The Federal Reserve, by law, is supposed to be independent from the White House.
Some of the president-elect's advisors have suggested that you should resign. If he asked you to leave, would you go?
No.
Powell's second term ends on May 15th of 2026.
Do you believe the president has the power to fire or demote you?
Not permitted under the law.
Analysts believe the Fed may lower interest rates again in December. In Washington, I'm Vinay Simlot.
Coming up here on Inside Utah Politics, Governor Cox cruises to term 2, where his priorities lie after a contentious election cycle.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
The largest school district in Utah is on its way now to being dissolved into 3 separate school districts serving northern Utah County. That decision comes after Utah County voters approved Propositions 11 and Proposition 14, both of which addressed splitting the Alpine School District. Board officials say voters have made it clear they want a new school district that better represents them and provides a high-quality education for children in their communities.
Because of current code and statute, each of the new areas will have 7 school board members representing them. So we'll go from right now, we have 7 school board members in Alpine School District. In a 3-way configuration, we'd actually have 21.
Well, the timeline for the split is set to take place over the next 3 years, and here are some key dates to keep in mind. November 2025, a new school board will be elected. January 2026, the elected board members will take office. February 2026, work begins on initiating the district split. July 2027, the new boards will begin operations in preparation for the 2027 school year. Weber County voters look to be on track to create Utah's newest city. The unincorporated communities in Ogden Valley are voting on whether they'd like to become a city. And right now, it looks like that will pass 68 to 32% with 100% reporting. If the result holds, Ogden Valley City will be the 3rd largest in the state by land size. And there's a separate vote on how the government there will work. Right now, a 6-member council is the leading option, but we're also following the governor's race for you. Republican incumbent Spencer Cox is expected to lead our state for a second term. He's beating Democrat Brien King 56% to 30%. That is with 69% of the votes in as we record this program. The numbers significantly trail Cox's 63 to 30 win over Chris Peterson. That's likely due to Representative Phil Lyman's write-in campaign, which netted him about 9%. After those results, Cox addressed Utahns saying, irrespective of the divide, he is here to work for everyone.
We were elected to represent everyone in the state of Utah, and our promise, as it has always been, is that we will work harder than everyone else, and that we will represent you. We will listen to you. We will learn from you. We have learned so much listening to the people who disagreed with us, who didn't vote for us over the past several months, and we're better leaders because of that. We look forward to continuing that dialogue and hearing from you.
Cox told us that night that Representative King called him to concede and congratulated him, but later said Representative Lyman had not. He tells us one of the things he's hoping to do in term 2 is unify the party.
There's certainly divides and factions in every party on the left and the right. There always have been. And so it's constant work to help bring the party together. But it's work that's important and work worth engaging in.
We also asked if that commanding win has led him to reconsider his plan to only serve 2 terms. He says he plans to keep that promise. Now, despite that commanding lead, Cox's race took a bit longer to call on election night. That's partly because of delays at the polls. In Utah County, for example, ballot printers ran out of toner, causing delays. And in Salt Lake County, hazmat crews responded to a polling location where a powder was found on a ballot there. ABC4's Annika Johns explains what she saw at polling places across the Wasatch Front.
In this year's election, over 50% of Utahns voted by mail, but that didn't necessarily make things easier here at the polls.
At the Salt Lake Government Center, 2 hazmat units responded to reports of an envelope with a white substance inside. Salt Lake County Clerk Lanny Chapman said the powder got onto a poll worker who was quickly isolated and evaluated. The room where the substance was found was also evacuated for about an hour. The substance was quickly contained and identified as nothing hazardous.
We take this very seriously. Our local law enforcement was downstairs with us when this happened. We were able to sequester the envelope and the poll worker that was working on it and have law enforcement come out to test the material that was involved.
In Utah County, a number of hiccups were taking place due to printing and number issues. County Clerk Aaron R. Davidson says almost 21,000 people voted in person in Utah County. They had planned for about 10,000.
Nothing goes perfectly in elections. When you have a system run by thousands of individuals, you're going to have some human error.
Despite the long wait, a number of Utahns waited in line to make sure that their vote was counted. Reporting from Highland, Utah, Annika Johns, ABC4 News.
Now, the following morning, Governor Spencer Cox and Lieutenant Governor Henderson took some time to address those issues. Our Kate Gardner breaks down what they had to say.
They're saying those long lines and issues, particularly in Utah County, should have been prevented, and they're beginning to look into what needs to be done to prevent it from happening again. Governor Cox also has a message to Utahns today about what he hopes to see happen as we move past Election Day. Voters wait for hours to cast their ballots in Utah County on election night.
I think that says something about Utahns, about Americans. We value the right to vote.
Lieutenant Governor Henderson says the Utah County Clerk had 10,000 provisional ballots for Election Day, but by mid-morning had already burned through half of them.
There was some lack of planning on the part of the clerk that I think, caused some problems that were unnecessary.
As lines began to grow longer, they soon learned other counties didn't have enough extra to help. So the state sent a plane to Arizona to get some ballot paper. Governor Cox says the paper likely cost $4,000. And by the end of the night, the county issued more than 20,000 provisional ballots.
County clerk is responsible for figuring out what voting should look like in their counties. They're responsible for deciding how many vote centers to stand up. They're responsible for deciding how much paper to stock. They're responsible for deciding how much ink to have on hand. And these are decisions that the state, that my office does not make. These are independently elected county clerks, and it's their responsibility to make sure that the voters in their county, no matter how many voters want to show up and vote, have that opportunity to do so.
She says they are now looking at what her office can do to prevent this in the future.
We shouldn't be focusing on changing the world. We should be focusing on changing our neighborhoods, making our communities stronger. Ultimately, that is how you change the world.
Governor Cox using today to acknowledge he knows much of the country is divided politically, but says we are all more alike than different.
Utahns and Utah can show the rest of the nation that there is a better way, a hopeful way, an optimistic way, and that's what makes America great. It is not her presidents. It's not her governors or lieutenant governors. It's everyday people in every neighborhood.
Lieutenant Governor Henderson emphasized that she doesn't want any of the election workers, especially those in Utah County, to feel like they did anything wrong. In fact, she says they did an excellent job with the circumstances they were given. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Kate Garner, ABC4 News.
Stay with us, everybody. More Inside Utah Politics coming up right after the break. That does it for today's Inside Utah Politics. Don't forget, if you have any local political stories you'd like to see, make sure to reach out. You can email InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can follow me along on social media on X at Brien Reports, and on Instagram, just search for Brien McElhatten. And you can find ABC4 on social media as well, so you can follow along with the news no matter where you are. And while you're at it, feel free to download the ABC4 News app. We are always on. Thanks so much for being with us, everybody. We'll see you right back here next week.